Well, every road I see leads away from me. There's not a single one that leads me home. The road keeps saying, friend, come see what's round the bend. So is it any wonder that I roam? All the places I have been keep calling me back again. Down in the pines I hear the cold winds blow. My heart keeps telling me, footloose and fancy free, and the road goes by and calls me as it goes. Well, maybe somewhere there's a someone waiting with a smile, and maybe there'll be some place I can stop and rest a while. And maybe you weren't meant to be just a rolling stone, and there's a road to travel on that leads you back to home. Well, hello, everybody. It is just me for the moment. Duke will be joining us momentarily. I'm glad you all have come in here tonight. We're going to talk about the weapons of Red Cloud's War, hopefully all of them. So the way this will work is when Duke gets here, he'll take over most of the talking because this is his show. And I will be reading out the comments. And if you have any questions, concerns, or just comments, throw them out there and I will read them. Until he gets here, we're going to go through, and we are going to, which he should be here within the next 5 minutes, we're going to go through, and I'll read who all's here and what all you got to say. So anyway, without further ado, Revere 311 says, I can't wait. Oh, 311, sorry. That was clear back at 326 this afternoon. Okay, Kodak Tackman's in. He said, yes, sir, Tales of the Trails. Diane Houston said, good evening, all. And Gunsmith 4570 said, good evening, everyone. And then Kent said, good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. Oregon Outback said, weather report from the Outback. Snow 4 days ago, followed by 80-degree temps. Glad I'm not a professional weather guesser. I'd be batting 0. Yep. Oklahoma, Gunsmith 4570 said, Oklahoma Panhandle, the only people who forecast the weather are fools and newcomers. Yeah, we're not too far apart if you're in the Oklahoma gun panel, or hand panel. Gunsmith, sorry about that. And yes, I will agree. Brandon Birch is in, says howdy, y'all. Oregon Outback said hi to Brandon Birch. Texan 1836 said good evening, boys. Good evening. Got Slowco's in, says good evening. Jolly Jake Level said, is that Ethan singing? Whomever it is sounds like a less Kentuckian Dwight Yoakam. No, that's me. I've recorded a couple songs. Yeah, Salvatore got the bowler. I'm trying to decide whether or not this is something I'm going to wear to Larned. I saw some pictures. I have some pictures of the era of the West, people wearing straw bowlers like this, and I might do it, but I might not. Depends on what else I get going on here. Might go with just my flat hat. Well, thank you, Texan 1836. Yep, that was me singing, and David W. said hello. So, Duke's not here yet. So, like I said, any questions you have or comments, we're going to break into this tonight. We're going to be probably digging into some books. I can probably start out here. There's several books in this that we're going to probably be talking about. I am going to have in my hand the Springfield Book 2 by Frasca and the all-important Wagon Box Fight, an episode of Red Cloud's War by Jerry Keenan. And thank you, Atlatl Man. And there's a few more books I have down here on the subject. We're going to be looking at Indian Wars cartridges, pouches, boxes, and carbine boots. This book is by R. Stephen Dorsey. I have a few of my fork books out here, but they're probably not going to come into play too much tonight. Outside of that, I got the Colt Bible down there, but I don't know if we're going to be digging into that or not. I still don't see Duke. So, that's where we're at right now at this particular moment. Let's see. A few announcements. I think Duke and I are going to be, I think I'm allowed to say, are going to be reenacting at Fort Larned on Memorial Day weekend, Fort Larned, Kansas. So I guess that'll be kind of interesting. That'll be our first time of doing it, or reenacting together. I've done some very loose reenactments, more like stage plays, but Duke's an old hand. And so that's where we're at on that. I've been studying and working on the Trapdoor series. I have 15 pages of notes and some of the information filmed. And hopefully, hi, by Landon C. I was just talking about my next Trapdoor episode. Hopefully in about 2 weeks, if you don't mind, Doc, I'll be sending you another video to proof. I did some very interesting study on the Remington rolling block U.S. adoption, which you had a lot of that already done. And the price, the differences in price were astounding to me. We actually went through what the cost was, because I actually watched your video, George, on Doc, sorry, on how on the naval adoption of the rolling block. And so I went back and I used some of the sources you had in there, obviously for my own, but found that the cost of the rolling block to make at Springfield was $14, and Remington sold them at $21 a piece, which was very interesting, because I did the cost split of the Trapdoor 1866, what it cost to make it at the time, and the exact amount of money that the government had was around $416,000. That was all they had for finances for firearms for 1867, 68, and 69. And when you do the math on that, with a standing military of around 56,000 people in the first 2 years of that, they would have only been able to armed a little over 20,000 people had they adopted and bought the rolling block. Making it, they could have made more, but as we see through that study, they ran into a few issues making it. Took a little bit longer than it did for them to just make an Allen conversion. So if anybody wants to know why they didn't adopt the rolling block, basically because they would have armed some of the Army, but for the next 3 years, 37,000 troops would have still been using muzzleloaders had they attempted to do that in the first 3 years of adoption. Still no Duke. All right. Let's see. You guys have any questions? Throw them out there till he gets here, and then we'll start this thing for real. So yeah, this is just this particular bowler I just got from Historic Emporium of all places. I thought, well, most of the time when I order from them, it comes in kind of cheap stuff, but when it came in, I was impressed. It's a nice palm leaf straw bowler, and like I said, I didn't find them. Actually, I tasked Santee to find them because I couldn't find them, but he did find photographs of the bowler in straw from the 1860s in the West. And here he is. Ta-da!
Can you hear me?
I hear you good. Hear you loud and clear.
Oofda.
We've been through everything and talked about everything until we ran out of things to talk about.
Okay.
So we're ready to go when you are.
All right. Yeah, I'm running a little bit behind here.
We may do.
Yeah, something come up and then went to get on the computer here and it says it's time for an update. Thanks.
Yeah, Todd B, I am planning on it. Pretty quick here, hopefully. I've done pretty well all the study on those. I would call them the Springfield rolling blocks, because there's a lot of stuff that Erskine Allen put into that 1870 model that wasn't there before. Kind of changed the entire action. But yeah, we are going to definitely have one of those.
All right.
That little man said Duke got locked into another bathroom he was trying to refit.
That project is mostly done.
Mostly
done. That pain in the butt. I did not read the instructions on the glue. I assumed it was the same as the glue that I had used when installing tile beforehand, which is you put it down, and by the time you put it down, it's gotten sticky enough it adheres a tile, they stick, then you're done. No, this is the stuff that's more like contact cement. You got to spread around, let it set for 2 hours, and then put the tile down. So we set the tile, and then, the next morning go to set the toilet, and as we're stepping on the tile, they're shifting all over the place because the glue is nowhere near dry.
Yep.
So what looked like a beautiful floor when we stopped that night fucking looks like crap now. But you know what? White caulk in the cracks. Can't tell it.
Can't tell a thing. Diane Houston's got a good start for us here. What years were the Buffalo Soldiers around?
They got commissioned during the Civil War and were around up until it was Vietnam. I think it was Vietnam before they finally or was it Korea? Anyway, we had separate Buffalo Soldier units during World War II. They served mostly in Europe. You had the Tuskegee Airmen that served in Europe, and then you had, I forget what divisions it was, but there was one of them in Italy. There's a great movie on there. Well, it's not that great, but there's a movie up there. I can't even remember what it was, but it was on the Buffalo Soldiers.
What was their name in World War One? Can I think of it?
Something
Harlem Hell Angels.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So anyway, the Buffalo Soldiers were a thing up until the Army went integrated in Korea, and I know in Vietnam it was an integrated Army.
Yeah. The doc by Land and Sea says Korea, I believe. Yeah, that's for sure. I think
Harlem Hellfighters. That's what it was.
Yep. That's what it was. I had to stop and think about it. But they're going to show up a lot in the early Indian Wars, that's for sure.
Yep. So during the Indian Wars era, you had the 9th and 10th Cav that was formed later 1860s, same time that the 7th Cavalry. So Custer's cavalry actually was not started until 1866. And he took command of that. Which is something that Garrett and I are going to be partaking in here in a couple weeks. Is something that has to do with Custer 7th. Todd B added on there. There was 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments. And there was a 3rd Infantry Regiment in the works there too. But
they
for the most part, it was the 9th and 10th, and then the 24th and 25th.
The first place I recall them showing up in this era, and they probably, or at least notably, is Beecher's Island, I think.
Yeah, they took part in Beecher's Island. So a lot of these cavalry units, just because you're in a cavalry unit doesn't mean you're going to be serving in the exact same spot that entire unit's going to be serving in. So like the 2nd Cav, which, and it had been the 2nd Dragoons, they've been stationed all over. When they become the 2nd Cavalry, come back from the Civil War, they were scattered. One company was down here at Fort Lyon, Company K, the 2nd U.S. That's the one that wound up at Fort Laramie. That's kind of my little, the only time I like playing soldiers when I'm playing Company K, 2nd Cav. But anyway, a lot of those units broke up. One of the rarities was the 7th. The 7th was always kind of close together. Mm-hmm. 2nd was broke up, and then the Buffalo Soldier units a lot of times were broke up. So you had elements of the 9th in Kansas. You had them up in Fort Robinson. Same with the 10th, and it was one of those elements that took place in the Battle of Beecher Island, and they actually came in and rescued Forsyth Scouts.
Very good. I was just sitting here thinking about this. How would you compare by mid-1870s? We always talk about the 7th Cavalry being kind of undermanned, undertrained. Not undermanned, I would say, but, not necessarily the most veteran of units by the time of, you know what I'm saying, by Little Bighorn. because we say
Right.
there's a lot of young immigrants there.
Yeah, it was all fresh recruit.
Yeah, so how would you put the Buffalo Soldiers? Were they fresh recruits coming in and out all the time, or was that a pretty battle-hardened outfit by?
There was some of them that were professional soldiers. But the thing is that I have not read up enough on them to really know. But I know that there was quite a few of them that's the only life they knew outside of being slaves or doing other forms of work out there. So yeah, there was a lot of professionals in there that stayed with it for a long time.
Doc has a good point here. He said the Black National Guard unit stood up for the Spanish-American War were referred to by the government as immunes. Thank you, Carrie.
Yep. So, and I know as Todd B said on there, they weren't called Buffalo Soldiers in World War II. There was a group, 92nd Infantry, had the Black Buffalo as their emblem. They still carried that title, Buffalo Soldiers. So it might not have been their official designation, but that nickname was still being used.
A thing.
Yeah. And then just trying to see if I can find here when they let's see here. Well, there's the Medal of Honor recipients. Just trying to find when they. Yeah, because in the tank unit, was the 761st Tank Battalion was the Black Panthers. I remember that. Oh, this doesn't tell you when they. Yeah, it doesn't say anything when they went out.
So
anyway.
In your mind, why do you think that they got put out west of all places immediately? Whereas, the more prestigious groups could have been put out there, the more.
Well, there was a lot of racism played into it.
You think it was?
They were sent out west and divided up just to have,
So was West considered secondary, or just people didn't want to go?
To a lot of soldiers, yes. Being stationed out in the West was not.
No, you would think since that's where the fighting's going on, that's where promotion would be, but.
Right. No, in fact, I'm having a brain fart. I'm going to give you fair warning tonight. My brain is not on full power because I have not slept well for the last couple nights. But it was Grattan. Grattan, when he got stationed out west, he felt that his military career was dead. So he didn't even have a commission when he got out to Fort Laramie. He was breveted a second lieutenant. When you're breveted, the lowest rank of officer, that's not good. Your military career is not going to advance.
Well, that's why he thought he needed to go do big things, huh?
But there was, in the early days, especially being sent out west, that was not considered ideal. Especially for enlisted men, you're going to be sent out there. You're going to be sent to a strange part of the country. You're out away from everything. Oftentimes you're being thrown into conflict with some people that you have no idea why you're there fighting them, what's going on. And so, they just, the less desirables were sent out west to fight Indians. It's kind of like, in Germany in World War II, you piss people off, you're going to get sent to the Eastern Front, as they would say.
It's big, it's cold, and a lot of people named Ivan shoot at you. Sorry, I had a Hogan's Heroes moment. You want to be combing your hair with an icicle, keep doing what you're doing.
But there were those that did want to come out west, but especially during a Civil War, it's like you get sent out west when all the big glory fights are back east. That was also something that was kind of looked down upon, but a lot of times with the officers, it was just you go where you got to go. But for the enlisted men, not all of them were happy to be there.
Okay. So, one more thing here before we move on. Todd B said the 25th Corps was an all black corps of the Army of James and was sent to Texas to fight against Mexico in 65. That war never happened. These soldiers eventually became Buffalo Soldiers. I do find that interesting that they're still, the French influence down there, but they're still concerned about war in Mexico right after the Civil War. And so, that
Well, yeah, because
interesting
Mexico had a lot going on. You had Benito Juarez and what's his name, Maximilian, going back and forth. Then you've got one pledging support to the Confederacy. So yeah, there was a lot going on in North America. The Civil War takes a lot of the show light on that. But on the plains you've got the Indian Wars going on, and down in Mexico you've got that conflict going on. There's a lot going on in the country.
And by the way, guys, if you're wondering any more about this on Duke's channel, Tales of the Trails, the channel Tales of the Trails, Tales of the Trail podcast, he's covering the in-depth history of Red Cloud's War, moving into it here. And so if you want the in-depth history of that, you can go there. But we're here to talk about kind of the guns and the history today. What do you think? What do you consider the first battle of Red Cloud's War?
Of specifically Red Cloud's War, it was, and I just talked about this in the last podcast episode. It really major battles. It was mostly small skirmishes. It was come in, steal livestock, attack wagon trains. I'm currently working on, and this is probably why my brain's fried because I've been working on it for the last couple hours, but currently working on the next episode, which is going to end with the Fetterman fight.
Yep.
But prior to that, the biggest event was probably just a few weeks before the Fetterman fight. And that was the fight of December 6th. And that was when Carrington decided he was going to take an offensive operation, and it ends without really a victor on either side.
Okay.
Because that was the natives' first attempt at getting the soldiers lured out from the fort and into an ambush.
So you wouldn't consider Platte Station Bridge or any of that to be a...
That's technically not in Red Cloud's War. That
Not
is
in Red
in the
Cloud's
War
War.
of 1865.
Okay, so
that's
66 rolls around, and that's Red Cloud's War.
Yeah, so it's one of the things is that there's one reason why I always refer to this time period as Indian Wars, because there's so many going on that are really all the same conflict, but they're different episodes of that same conflict.
Yeah.
So you have what some historians call the Colorado War, 1864, and it's going to end with Sand Creek. And then you have the Indian War of 1865. That's also been called part of the Colorado War. There are historians that call it Red Cloud's War. But the thing about the War of 1865 is that the War of 1865 was not for the purpose of keeping immigrants off that Bozeman Trail. That was for revenge against the attack at Sand Creek.
Okay.
That was not organized by Red Cloud. It was actually the Cheyenne that started that. Now, Red Cloud did fight in it. He certainly did. He took part in it. A lot of the same, it's going to be the exact same players, and a lot of it taking part in that fight. Spotted Tail took part in it at some point. But as 1865 comes to an end, the natives are, I wouldn't say 100% satisfied, but they realize that they're not going to get what they want. And so Red Cloud decides to seek peace. And in December of 1865, he sends word to the new commander of Fort Laramie, Colonel Maynadier, that he's wishing to be friendly and to seek peace with the whites. And so the government tries to organize a peace treaty in 1866. Supposed to be in May, winds up not happening until June. And the natives, they just want to bring it into the fighting so that they can go on back to living their lives. But the government is like, okay, yeah, we're going to bring it into the fighting, but let's see if we can get some more out of it. Like the Bozeman Trail opened up, because Civil War has been over just a little over a year at this point. Country's in economic turmoil. They need gold. They need gold fast. There's 3 ways to get to the Montana gold fields. Go up the Yellowstone in the Missouri, go on the Oregon Trail over to Utah, and then back up on the west side of the Rocky Mountains. Or you can go up the Oregon Trail to Fort Laramie and then branch off up there around Casper, Flatbridge Station, and head north. And that is actually the easiest, the shortest, and least expensive route for most of the immigrants that are coming across there by wagon train. And so they want that route opened. Well, Red Cloud don't want to give it up. A lot of these chiefs don't want to give that up. It's like, no, when you brought the Oregon Trail through, it ran off all the game. We don't want another road going through our hunting ground. This is our last prime hunting ground. Mm-hmm. And which that was true because the trade of the 1840s, Buffalo Robe trade in the late 1830s through the 40s and 50s, the herds had shifted around. And so that Powder River Basin is kind of where those northern herds had kind of wound up. Whereas down here in Colorado with Bent St. Vrain Company, the herds went west or east. So it was one of those things that they didn't want to sell a trail. They just wanted to make peace. They wanted to bring it into the fighting. The government's like, yeah, we want to bring it into the fighting, but we want to open this road. And then you've got the Hawks and the Doves, as they're called back in Washington. The Hawks wanting to use military force to get what they want. The Doves wanting to negotiate peace. The Doves send out a peace commission that doesn't know one end from the other when it comes to dealing with the natives. All they know is that the government wants a peace policy and they're here to do it. And so that Treaty of 1866 is going to wind up being signed by the people that aren't actually living in that country, because the one thing that really ticks them off, Red Cloud and Man Afraid of His Horses and several other leaders, is that Colonel Carrington marches into Fort Laramie right in the middle of negotiations, and they find out he's heading up the Bozeman Trail where that peace commissioner the day before, or a couple days before, had told them, we will not send soldiers or build forts along the Bozeman Trail. If you promise not to molest traffic, we'll pay you $70,000 a year to travel that trail. And then all of a sudden, boom, here's the soldiers. Oh, they're going to go build forts and occupy the Bozeman Trail. And so Red Cloud and his followers say, screw you. They leave. The Native Americans, I should say, that remain at Fort Laramie say, yeah, we'll sign your peace treaty to bring about the end of the fighting. They're not the ones living in the Powder River country. This is Spotted Tails, Brules, a few other groups that live mostly down in the Nebraska area. And so they sign the treaty. The peace commissioners report back to Washington. Oh, yeah, they signed the treaty. We're going to have peace. There'll be no fighting. And Jim Bridger pretty much summed it up as that the Indians that actually mattered didn't sign that treaty. And, you know, the peace commissioners were full of, I won't say it.
Yeah.
That is how we start off the middle of 1866. And so once Carrington marches in, Red Cloud gets word of it. Red Cloud says, well, you know, we're not going to talk anymore. We're going to fight. That's really when Red Cloud's war itself starts, because it's no longer about avenging Sand Creek. You know, that war's pretty well done.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's renewed. And now it's Red Cloud leading the way. Even though it's going to be mostly the same combatants that took part in this. Big difference is that the Cheyenne, it's not going to be congregated. So a lot of the Southern Cheyenne that have been down in this kind of part of the country that had actually been, you know, directly affected by Sand Creek, they had gone north during the War of 1865. They're not going to be up there this time. They're going to stay down here, because at the same time you've got Red Cloud's war going on, you have conflict down on the Southern Plains in Kansas. And that's something I'm going to get into in another episode series. That's Hancock's war and such.
All right, so I was just out double checking, but we do have a question here. Josh Harris says, what caliber were the Spencer rifles used by the Army during Red Cloud's War, Fetterman Massacre, powder load, and bullet weight? This is where it's a little bit iffy, because as we have to determine he said Red Cloud's War, right? Have to determine the date of Red Cloud's War, because I'm not sure when those 1865 Spencers get there.
We do know they had Spencers.
Mm-hmm. There's two
It was
models, though.
likely a mix, because when you get to reading in it, there's no unit that's supplied with everything the same.
Yeah. But, and this is what I don't know because I've never studied Spencers. If it's like a Springfield, it's definitely going to be the next year after production date before they get there. So that split, and he's wanting to know the bullet load. The 1865, which is what you would think they should be using for Western warfare, would be a 350 grain bullet over 45 grains of powder. So not quite what trapdoor carbine was shooting, but close. And but the other one was 5656, which was, I'm not sure. Do you remember the load on 5656?
I don't remember it.
I'll probably look it up right quick.
But it was likely 5656.
Yeah, it should be
being used. There's not going to be a whole lot of 5650s out quite yet, but they're going to be starting to show up pretty quick. Yeah. But yeah, considering there's 200,000 Spencers, was it 200 or 250,000 Spencers
that are something to that effect? War. Yeah, there's a lot of them. They're everywhere,
and not just for the Army, but they're being made and sold on the civilian market as well. So there's a lot. But 5650 is pretty common, and then after, towards the end of the Civil War, they start experimenting with different rounds too. So you have the 5650 that's going to come out in 1865. You also got the 5648, or is it 5638 and 5640? Anyway, you come out with a bunch of these different calibers where they neck them down smaller bullets, try to get a little more velocity, and you see some really, really tough bottleneck cartridges come out of there. It's like shoulders go in like this.
Okay, so they must have just made the bullet longer, because they're saying the 5656 was a 360 grain bullet over 42 grains of powder, whereas the 5650 is a 350 grain bullet over 45 grains of powder. That must be the difference. No, they probably just lengthened it. It's a very about shut that down wrong. It's a very interesting thing, and we're talking about the Guns of Fetterman's fight here, the Red Clouds War, but in the Hayfield fight, because I was reading on it for my Trapdoor episode, 29 soldiers in the Hayfield, not the wagon box, the Hayfield, and 7 civilians, all 7 civilians armed with Spencers in that fight.
Not quite all of them.
Well, that's according to Jerry Keenan, they are. So now, the wagon box fight, 2 Henrys and like 4 Spencers.
See, this wagon box. Okay. This one, if you can find it, they're expensive, but Red Clouds War by McDermott, it's 2-volume series. He lists all the guns. Okay, this is still.
That might not have been Jerry Keenan that said that. I might have read that on an online article. I was just looking at it. He didn't.
This is still. Oh, where the hell's the Hayfield? The 814 train is on time. All right, there we go. Hayfield fight. All right. So we have. Because they talk about the see how they built the fortification, and I was mistaken. I thought at Wagon Box or at Hayfield that they had built fortifications just like Wagon Box with the boxes of wagons. No, they actually had a corral built. Let's see.
20 soldiers and 9 civilians. Okay, I misread it. Most of the civilians are armed with 7-shot Spencer repeating rifles. It did not say all. I misread all.
Which one do you have there?
That is an online article by. Let's see if I can find it. Who has this? Who wrote this? That is is that FG Burnett you have?
Oh, Finn Burnett?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Finn Burnett was actually a guy that participated in the battle.
Okay, this is
Um,
from Fort C.F. Smith in the Hayfield fight, Bozeman Trail Historical Accounts of the Blazing of the Overland Routes,
Right.
Volume 2, by Grace Raymond Herbard.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because
Okay,
according to
that's
McDermott, he lists 12 civilians.
Okay.
Um,
3 civilians hide in the woods?
no. That was Wagon Box.
Okay.
So let's see here, because he lists. All right. Zeke Colvin had an infield muzzleloader. Burnett and Howard had Spencer carbines, Wheeling a Spencer rifle, Duncan and Little had Winchester rifles, because these guys had the new, as
And
it was advertised
66s.
at the time, the improved Henrys. So those are 66s. Al Colvin had a Henry repeater, and William Hayne had a Ballard breech loader. All had Colt sidearms. And then there was a couple double barrel shotguns. One guy had the Poe Sutler, had his double barrel 10 gauge. And that 10 gauge he loaded with buckshot charges of 16 pellets. So holy crap. And in fact, to talk about, one of the guys picked up that shotgun and shot a native at such a close range that it nearly decapitated the warrior.
So that must have just been from that guy's memory that he was writing that article.
Yeah, Finn Burnett. Yeah.
So,
And when you read Finn Burnett's stuff, he gets a lot of things because he's writing it after the fact.
Yeah,
and that's the one thing about firsthand accounts is the more time is between when it happened and when they wrote it.
Yeah,
the less accurate it is. But or the years get wrong. But anyway, yeah. So that one, yeah, they kind of list there. So there was 3 Spencers in total. Now at Wagon Box, there was quite a few more Spencers. Because if I remember right, Wagon Box, there was a guy that had 3 Colt pistols, 2 Spencers, and a Henry.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah. So early on there in Red Cloud's War, the military, the 18th Infantry shows up. They've all got Springfield and infield muzzleloaders, 58 caliber. When Carrington arrives at Fort Laramie, he's promised ammunition. He's supposed to get his full supply of ammunition. He arrives at Fort Laramie and finds 1,000 rounds. That's it. And he's told there's more ammunition for him up at Fort Reno, which had been Fort Connor, established a year before during the Indian War of 1865.
So he's leading cavalry unit, or he's leading infantry?
He's leading infantry, but
okay.
He's also,
so you're talking paper cartridges, 1,000 rounds of paper cartridges,
and Carrington is. He learns pretty quick that he's got to make them mounted infantry. And as soon as I can find it here, so I don't have to go digging through books again. Oh, crap. Did I lose it?
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to find my document where I typed up for Peace Treaty of 66, but apparently I have lost it. But anyway, yeah, so he arrives at Fort Reno, and he gets another, I think it's 36,000 if I remember right. So it brings his total ammunition count to 60,000 rounds, which equals out to just over 50 rounds per man in his unit.
Okay, sorry about that. I was listening to a severe storm warning coming over. But
no worries.
Yeah, if we get knocked out, that's what happens. At least on my end. It'll still be on your end.
Yeah, well, we got a thunderstorm overhead here too, so.
Yeah. All right, so let's back up just a little bit. We were talking about Spencers and guns and that type. Let's go back to Fetterman, because there's already some people commenting here. And right. I want to hop through these just a little bit. We're talking about Arizona Frontiersman said nicely. Thank you. Joshua Harris asked about that. iPod Walker said, what about Roman nose? We'll get to that in a minute. Steve Ferris said, Fetterman was muzzleloaders and 2 Henrys. And Gina Woods is in, said, howdy to my guys. Just grabbed a Coke and popcorn.
Oh, don't mention Coke. I'm trying to cut back. I've only had 2 today.
Okay, real quick, jump into Samuel said off topic. What's everybody's opinion of Spiller and Burr? Never owned an original. Had a replica. You got any thoughts, Duke? Before I give a quick
that's the brass frame one I handled,
with
right?
the top, with the top strap, little bitty feeling one.
Yeah, that one I love the handle of that one.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get back out there one of these days, we need to go out and shoot that.
Yeah. They handle between a 51 Navy and a 49 pocket model, feel really, really, really good in the hand. The replicas tend to shoot higher than replica Colts for some reason, like really, really, really high. That's I think it's a good gun. I like the replica. You have to do some work to bring it down and make it shoot where it needs to. Okay. Bylandon C said 350 grain bullet or 45 grain powder charge for the 56. That's what I saw. That was a confusing article I was reading there. Opinionated. Okay, so Fetterman fight. There's more than muzzle loaders there, as you said, 2 Henrys. But
Right.
Isn't there more than that there?
Yeah, so the cavalry soldiers, when Carrington, his band arrives at Fort Phil Kearny, they are armed with Spencers.
Rifles?
The musicians, the non-combatants, are armed with Spencers. The fighting men have muzzleloaders. And when the 2nd Cavalry arrives, they're still carrying a few outdated breech loaders, the Sharps breech loaders, and other varieties. And they also have, some of them have Springfield muskets. And so Carrington's going to give some of the Spencers towards them. Basically, the Spencers are going to get distributed out.
When you say outdated breech loaders, you're talking paper cartridge cutters.
Yeah. At this point, the Army considers them outdated because they are moving towards the self-contained metallic cartridge.
Yes. Fast.
And Carrington calls them outdated. He keeps writing letters. And from the minute he leaves Fort Laramie and gets to Fort Reno, he starts writing his commanders. I need men. I need guns. I need ammunition. I have outdated muzzle loaders. I need new breech loaders.
Well, by that point, 5,000. Let's see, what was this? This is December of 66. So 5,000 plus rimfire breech loader trapdoors have been made, and everybody knows about them, but they're not making their way west because they're experimental models that are very janky, to say the least. Go ahead.
So they are, trying to get these things, or Carrington's trying to get his troops better armed. He's definitely trying to get the ammunition. He's at Fort Phil Kearny with 60,000 rounds. 60,000 rounds, like I said, it equals out to 50 rounds per man. Most of these men are new recruits. He's got 640 men under his command. He's the 640, 560 of them are new recruits. And he's missing a good number of his officers because they've been recruited for or put on recruiting duty and other duties and such. And so Carrington's in bad shape. And he also keeps telling them the Indians are not at peace right now. They're fighting me. I'm fighting. There's fights going on every day. Wagon trains are being attacked. Livestock's being run off. This is a daily basis almost. And the government just like, whatever, they signed the peace treaty. We're good.
It's all in your imagination.
In September, the acting assistant inspector general for the Department of the Platte, Colonel Hazen, goes out to inspect Carrington's progress, make sure Carrington's doing his job. And he gets there and he sees what's going on. He's at Fort Reno and stock's being run off every day. He gets up to Fort Phil Kearny, spends 2 days there, sees Carrington's spending time building fortifications. And he's like, well, he says, pretty impressed with Palisade Wall. He was very impressed with the Palisade Wall, but he's like, Carrington's spending all the time building defenses, and his men and his supplies are out in the weather, exposed to the elements. Part of that was that the sawmills that Carrington had ordered were slow showing up. And then he goes on to inspect Fort C.F. Smith. And when he comes back, he says Carrington's spending too much time building defensive structures and not enough time taking the offense. And the one thing that he says in support of Carrington is that, these troops are underarmed. They are undersupplied in ammunition, and there's no peace up here. It's warfare. It's constant fighting. And so General Sherman writes a letter to Carrington shortly thereafter that and says, it's been determined that the natives in that area are in a hostile state. Mm-hmm. It's like, telling me what I already know. And then he says, we'll give you the full support that you need. And so he finally receives a shipment of ammunition, 60,000 rounds. He asked for 160,000. So he got, just under a third of the ammunition that he needed. But he can't really do much for target practice because at this point he definitely is down to 50 rounds a man. He's happened to go out and rescue the wood trains. He's happened to go out and rescue wagon trains that are being attacked. And on top of that, his soldiers, his officers are sitting there like, why aren't we taking the fight to the natives? Why aren't we going out and attacking them? We need to be taking the fight to them because during the Civil War, Carrington did not take part in battles. He was an administrator during the Civil War. Spent the whole Civil War behind a desk. Whereas his officers had been in the fights during the Civil War. And so Carrington's taken a defensive approach. His officers want to take offensive operations. And so everything's just coming to a head. Nothing is really going well. And as ammunition starts showing up, the 2nd Cavalry is going to show up shortly thereafter. He gets one company of the 2nd. They show up, like I said earlier, with Springfield muzzleloaders, with breech-loading Sharps. They will get some of the Spencers. And then one of his officers that he had during the Civil War, Captain Fetterman, is going to arrive. Now, Fetterman, he'd grown up in a military family. His dad went to West Point, but his mother and dad passed away when he was at a very young age, and so he went to live with his mother's brother, so his uncle Judd, the namesake for, and that's the family name, Judd, was the namesake for his middle name. And that uncle had served in the 3rd Artillery during the Mexican-American War, so he had military all throughout his upbringing. Mm-hmm. And so he applies to get into West Point, and he's rejected. He's not accepted into West Point. But he gets a second chance, and when the Civil War breaks out, he gets his commission as a lieutenant. And he fights gallantly during the Civil War. And so he continues his military career. He's going to arrive in November at Fort Phil Kearny, and almost immediately he wants to take the fight to the enemy. He starts pressing Carrington. We need to go out. We need to attack the natives because Red Cloud, and I doubt the soldiers knew this, Red Cloud had about 3,000 to 4,000 warriors. Mm-hmm. And they had not moved away from the fort. They'd actually moved closer to Fort Phil Kearny because they wanted to make sure that they could hit them every day. And for a long time, they've been planning, we need one massive fight to force these soldiers back down to the forts along the Oregon Trail. Because Red Cloud, he didn't care about Fort Laramie. It had been there plenty long enough. He knew he wouldn't get that close, but he didn't not want these new forts. So that's going to be his focus. Push them out, push them back to Fort Laramie. They can stay there. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, he's attacking, hitting them every day. And Fetterman, with support of Lieutenant Grummond, and Lieutenant Grummond would also served in the Civil War, but Grummond, he's kind of not a nice person to deal with. Prone to drunkenness, beating the crap out of his subordinates. Just a very overly aggressive person to deal with. And also Lieutenant Brown. And that's one of the ones that doesn't get mentioned at the big fight coming up is Lieutenant Brown. Brown was also amongst this trio of 3 officers that really think Carrington should be taking offensive operations. And so Fetterman goes up to Carrington at one point and says, give me 50 mounted soldiers, 50 mounted civilians, and we will go attack these villages on the Tongue River because they weren't that far away. We will take the fight to the enemy. And Washington's pressing Carrington. Use the winter to your advantage. During the winter time, you will be able to use the inferior number you're supplied with to overcome the natives.
Yeah.
It's pretty apparent that everybody that's wanting to take the fight to the Indians have not fought the Indians.
Yep.
They have fought, regular warfare back east.
Mm-hmm.
So that what they would call at the time civilized warfare versus Indian warfare were 2 different ball games.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, Jim Bridger, apparently to Fetterman's face, tells him, if you ever find yourself in a fight with Indians and you're in command, it will be your first and last fight in the Indian country.
Yeah, that's prophetic.
Arrogant Fetterman is.
Mm-hmm.
And so on December 6th, Carrington decides, all right, it's time to, everybody's pressuring me to go to an offensive operation. So when the woodcutters come under attack on December 6th, Carrington decides to take to the field. He's going to lead the attack. And so he takes out 2 groups. He decides to do a pincher movement. He sends Fetterman with, I just read it too, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but he sends Fetterman, I think it was about 30-some cavalry. He takes a little over 20 mounted infantry. Fetterman and I can't even remember the other officer. Fetterman and Brown are to go to the woodcutting detail and relieve them. At the same time, Carrington with Grummond are going to take their mounted infantry. They're going to ride on the other side of Lodge Trail Ridge and try to cut off the natives as they retreat. The idea is Fetterman's going to flush them out, and Carrington's going to come in and cut them off.
Mm-hmm.
Unbeknownst to them that the Indians at this point, they've got a major ambush in plan. Yellow Eagle's the one heading it up, supported by High Backbone, and Crazy Horse. And they've got little ambush points kind of figured out. And so Fetterman heads to the woodcutting detail. They finds the woodcutters under siege by 100 warriors. They see Fetterman, they take off, and Fetterman follows right behind. And Fetterman chases them for 5 miles, and then all of a sudden, boom, they stop running. And he finds himself surrounded on 3 sides, basically in a horseshoe shape. And Lieutenant Bingham sees this happening. He turns around, spurs his horse back to Fort Phil Kearny, and takes most of the men with him, 3/4 of the men. There's 30 of them. He takes 3/4 of them, bolts. Fetterman, Lieutenant Bingham, basically force the remaining ones to dismount at gunpoint. Says, if you leave here, we will shoot you. And so
this is the one part where live to fight another day was the better option.
Yeah. So Fetterman is surrounded by 150 warriors with less than 20 men. And, it's getting into a tight scrape. The thing that saves him is that suddenly Carrington comes riding down the other side of the hill. Carrington can see the fight. The natives see Carrington coming. Boom, they break off. And Grummond had gotten separated from Carrington. So Grummond's coming back in. Carrington sees the natives break off the attack. So he starts chasing them to try to head them off. Well, they see him turn. The natives say, oh, well, he's not coming to save Fetterman. They go back to attacking Fetterman. And it nearly turns into a disaster. And then all of a sudden, all the soldiers come together in one point, and they don't see a native anywhere. And during this whole time, Red Cloud and several other elders are up on the hill watching as this goes on and kind of see that, yeah, these soldiers can be lured out. Crazy Horse realizes these soldiers can easily be lured into a trap. And so that just wasn't their day. And so Fetterman and the rest of the men Carrington. We'll head back to Fort Phil Kearny, and the officers are blaming Carrington. Once again, he's not offensive enough. He doesn't want to fight. He's a coward.
So that fight would have been done with the Spencer rifles then?
They had some Spencers, and they had a lot of muzzleloaders still.
Okay, gotcha.
Because, like I said, yeah, they're not very well supplied. Not very well supplied at all. And so they get back. The Indians reorganize. They start doing their plan. And finally they decide they're going to try this once again. And so on December 21st, they again try their attack. They attack the woodcutting detail. The pickets up on Pilot Hill send a message to the fort that the wagon train's under attack. And so Carrington orders Fetterman, and Fetterman volunteered for it, but he orders Fetterman to take out the relief column to relieve the woodcutting detail. I can't remember how many men he had. But after Fetterman leaves, he's going to send Lieutenant Brown and Lieutenant Drummond out with the rest of the complement, and it's going to total out to 80 men. That included 2 civilians, Wheatley and Fisher. Both those men had just purchased Henry rifles and wanted to see how they fared in an Indian fight. And so they proceed out. Carrington made it very clear, relieve the woodcutting detail. Under no circumstance do you cross Lodge Trail Ridge. Return to the fort and with the woodcutting detail. Well, by the time the soldiers get to the woodcutting detail, the attack's over. Now the natives are up on Lodge Trail Ridge. And Carrington sits back and watches, and he can see Fetterman and them heading up Lodge Trail Ridge and then riding parallel alongside of it. And he assumes it's so they could get a better advantage point. And then suddenly you see the whole detachment just start going over the ridge and out of sight. And within a few minutes, you start hearing gunfire that starts out slow and then just all of a sudden turns into a roar, enough to know that there's a major fight going on the other side. And so Carrington orders Captain Tenador Tinike to take a relief column with a howitzer and to go up and rescue Fetterman, Brown, and Drummond. And when Tinike gets up on top of the ridge and looks down, the fight's done. Most of the warriors have left. There's just a few left that are still mutilating bodies and looting what's left on the field. And so what had happened, because there's no survivors on the soldier side, we have to take this all from Indian accounts, was that the infantry with the muzzleloaders got the furthest down the hill. Now, the infantry was mounted. That's one thing Carrington had done, was that he went to mounted infantry because he realized infantry on foot just cannot keep up in this kind of warfare. But they had gotten furthest down the ridge. And on Lodge Trail Ridge, as you look at it, there's a big kind of a mesa on a ridge. And then there's a little saddle and a little knob. Fetterman had led the group through that little saddle. And as that saddle goes down, it makes another little ridge. And basically that's where the Bozeman Trail goes down. The infantry got down that, and once the natives sprung the attack, the Sioux and the Lakota come up from, as you're looking down the ridge from the right, the Cheyenne and the Arapaho came in from the left. And as one warrior said it, there were so many arrows in the air that most of the Indian casualties in that battle were from arrows from other warriors. I said there was like grasshoppers in a swarm. And so the infantry, they fire their first volley, and before they can reload, it's hand-to-hand combat. It does not take very long, and they are wiped out. The cavalry's a little further bit behind. They managed to get back towards the rocks. They have the Spencers. They managed to hold out a little while longer, but it's the same thing. There's so many arrows in the air. It doesn't take very long, longer than what the infantry lasted, but it doesn't take very long, and they're wiped out. The last two that are killed are Wheatley and Fisher, and they had gotten inside the rocks. They had the Henrys, and When they found their bodies, there was hundreds of spent cases on the ground around them, and then you could see a ring of bloodstains around those rocks. So they knew that they had fought well. And the natives say that they fought well, that they were the last 2 men killed. And it very well could have been they ran out of bullets. Who knows? But once they were dead, then the natives began the mutilations that took place. The belief at the time by a lot of soldiers at Fort Phil Kearny is that the soldiers were killed and mutilated while they were still alive. That usually comes after the battle. And it was a scare tactic because it was kind of a psychological thing. The natives believed that if you mutilate the body of a slain enemy in the afterlife, he will not be able to fight you as effectively. So they often cut off limbs, bash in heads, gouge out eyes, cut out internals. Many of them were said to have had the hearts removed, disemboweled, cuts on the arm down to the bone, same on the legs. And so as Tenite come upon this scene, those soldiers, Tenite sends a messenger back down to the fort and says, we need wagons and we need more men to load these bodies up. And one of the soldiers that partook in the loading of recovering of the fallen men said that no man wound up with his own parts. They're loaded in the wagon. One man might have the guts of another. One man might have the limb bones of another. It was impossible to tell who belonged to what. The only body that was not mutilated was the bugler, Adolf Metzger. And he had fought and had basically used his bugle as a weapon. And the natives, to commend him for his bravery, covered him in a buffalo robe, and his body was left unmolested on the field. Now, that used to be thought of as tall tale until after the turn of the century. It was in the 1930s. A bugle was found up on that site that was completely mangled. And that's currently on display in a museum up in Buffalo, Wyoming. But his body was the only one that was not molested. They weren't able to recover all the bodies before night came upon them, so they took what they could recover, and as they started to move back to the fort, as they were crossing Lodge Trail Ridge, one of the wagons tipped over. And so the soldiers had to, once again, load up the remains of their fallen comrades into that wagon and return to the fort. And then the bodies were laid out in the parade ground and covered under a white sheet. And once again, like they said, no body got its own parts. And because the ground was frozen, it took several days to dig a grave. It was basically one mass grave that the bodies were put into. And after that, suddenly, when word gets back to Washington, they realize that this is a crisis.
I was just going to delve into that just a little bit before you go on. What months would you say that was that Carrington was reporting back needing more modern guns and need more?
He was started writing letters from the minute he got there.
Which was when?
He started construction of Fort Phil Kearny in July. Okay. So, and
interesting historical thing here on the government side here, because there's no mention after the first 5,000 trapdoors get done. The troops get them. They're kind of like these 58 rimfires don't eject well. They don't shoot real well. They're not the best. Everybody knows they're experimental. They break easy. And there's no word from 1866, January of 1866, to Erskine Allen outside of he lets them know, I've got a new model that works. All right. And he lets them know that as early as April 2nd of 1866. No word back. But interesting thing was Dreyer on July 28th of 1866 writes to Benton a really strange letter. And Frasca, who wrote this book, he even takes note that it's strange that He says, Sir, Secretary of War, having directed the conversion of 20,000 additional Springfield rifle muskets into breech loader and the preparation of an adequate supply of ammunition for them, you will take immediate measures to carry this order into effect. The plan of alteration will be to Mr. Allen's modifications, caliber 50 of an inch, a lot of that. He goes through all of this, and basically he's saying half these arms will be varnished stocks. Each issue, half these arms will have varnished stocks. Half of them won't even be finished. And he said each issue of equal numbers of varnished and unvarnished stocks. Please inform the Bureau we need this soon, and let us know at what rate you'll be able to prepare these arms. Major A.B. Dreyer, Chief of Ordnance, he wrote that to Benton, the commandant of Springfield, on July 28th. And Frasca himself wrote, from the language of this letter, you would think there was suddenly an arms crisis in the country. Normally, the Ordnance Department asks for clarifications, many prototypes of samples, productions, commitment, and he's just saying there's no first time in this whole era, no testing, no trials. We get a letter, we got to have these guns now. And I'm wondering if that has to do with Carrington pushing them. Now, the funny thing is, Allen and Benton will write back and tell them, sure, we can have these things ready to go by January of 1867.
Right.
And they said we can start out by because they'd had their whole staff cut drastically after the Civil War. They're like, we can start out the first month making 10 a day. And he said, as we slowly hire people, we will start making more and more until by midsummer, we should be able to crank out 200 guns a day. Well, the funny thing is they're going along really slow. No more word comes back. Until, as you said, December 21st of 1866, Fetterman gets wiped out. December 24th, they get this urgent letter, go into production. I want 200 guns a day in January 2nd, whatever it takes, hire whoever you got to hire, get it done. Allen and Benton do the first time in Springfield Armory history. Not only do they work Christmas Day, December 25th, they hire double shifts that they hadn't done since the Civil War, go for a 20-hour work day, and they start cranking out 200 guns a day January 2nd. And I honestly think this is all because of Fetterman. It has to be.
And word would have been to Washington by then because so after the battle, Carrington realized what's going on. There's a telegram that's sent out. Mm-hmm. But Carrington can't be sure that the lines have not been molested.
Mm-hmm. And
so he asked for writers to go out. One of the men that volunteer for it after they get offered a heck of a good paycheck for that is Portuguese Phillips, John Portuguese Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a long story that Portuguese Phillips went by himself. He didn't. There was a couple others that went with him. They left at different times just in case. But the three of them wind up riding together, and they're going to arrive at Fort Reno and deliver the message there because that's what their orders are. Ride to Fort Reno, send out the telegram.
Yep.
Now, Portuguese Phillips still wasn't sure that message was getting out on telegraph because at Fort Reno, they said they hadn't heard anything on the line all day.
Mm-hmm.
And so they send out telegraph. Portuguese Phillips mounts up again. We don't know if it's the same horse that he borrowed because he did take Carrington's horse from Fort Phil Kearny. If it was me, I wouldn't take the same horse that I just rode all night to get there on. And so he rides from Fort Reno. He arrives at Deer Creek Station, sends a message again, continues on to Fort Laramie. He's going to arrive at Fort Laramie on Christmas Day, midnight of Christmas Day, or just before midnight of Christmas Day. He arrives there. There's an officer's ball going on in Old Bedlam, which was the post headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
And he arrives in. The officers are like, what's the meaning of this? Why is this civilian here in the middle of our grand ball that we're having? And he delivers a message. Now, unbeknownst to him, they had received word on the telegraph line of what had happened. But the fact that he arrived and told them, basically that was your clarification that this in fact did happen.
Mhm.
Legend says that the horse was dead on the parade ground when he arrived. According to McDermott and Red Cloud's Wars, that the horse was taken to the stables and died the next day.
Mhm.
Either way, the horse does die, but it sounds prettier when you say, "Oh, it died right there on the parade ground." You ride a horse that hard, you're going to kill it.
Mhm.
Either way. So when Portuguese Phillips arrives, delivers a word, it becomes certain, and then the government suddenly has a problem. Who do we blame for this? And
the blame seems to fall on the firearms nowadays.
yeah, and it kind of was one of those things like, well, let's blame it on the commanding officer at Fort Phil Kearny for not being adequate in doing his duties, not taking the fight. And so in January of 1867, Carrington's going to receive word that you are relieved of command. You are to proceed to Fort Casper and take command there.
Mm-hmm.
And Carrington leaves, and he's basically going to wind up getting mustered out of the army in disgrace, and then spends a good chunk of his life trying to regain his honor. And the thing is that you can go back and you can read in his letters that he was requesting arms. He was requesting ammunition. He was requesting more men. Well, after he's out of the picture, suddenly the army starts sending in more arms, more ammunition, and more men.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you get into 1867, it's going to be more of the same tactics that took place during the summer of 1866. It's going to be the hit and run, attack the wagon trains, run off stock. But in 1867, the big difference is that there's not civilians on the trail.
Yeah.
The last civilians had come through in 1866 in August. After that, it was too dangerous. So most of it's going to be the military wagon trains, supply wagon trains, and stuff that are getting hit. But Red Cloud was certain that the Fetterman fight was enough that would scare the soldiers back to, Platte River.
Yep. So at this point, we've had in Red Cloud's War, just kind of going back to the firearms thing, we've had basically one skirmish and then the Fetterman massacre.
Yeah, we've had
both, and those
two large scale. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So and those fights almost consistent with 3 firearms. The 1863, because actually I know for a fact they didn't have the 64 model out west at that point. So the 1863 Springfield muzzleloader, the Spencer, be it rifle or carbine. Was the carbine involved in any of this? Yes. No.
It's kind of a conjecture because
we know the rifle was, though.
Because a lot back in the day, civilians don't always speculate between difference between carbine and rifle. Yeah. If it's long enough that it requires 2 hands, it's a rifle.
Okay, so the Spencer action, definitely the long gun for the Army.
So Spencers were involved.
And Henry repeaters, and a couple 66s for the civilians.
Right, and that's going to be, after Fetterman.
We know that the 66 as well, but we do know the Henry, the Spencer, and the 1863 Springfield muzzleloader are involved on this side. What about the natives?
So the natives actually don't have a lot of firearms. Most of what firearms they have are muzzleloaders. So you're going to see Northwest trade guns. You're going to see layman muzzleloading rifles. There are a few natives that managed to get their hands on revolvers. There's one that talks about having a Colt Navy revolver. Well, I don't know if it's a Navy, but a Colt revolving pistol.
Just so they know, it probably is, because one of the things about Red Cloud's War is, surprisingly, as far as I know from the letters I've read, the 1860 Army doesn't isn't as well represented in this particular era because the government hasn't issued them for 3 years and Colt hasn't made them for 3 years.
Right. And there were some 1860s out west. At Sand Creek, the soldiers were armed with 1860 revolvers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a mix. They did have Remingtons. They were issued Remingtons on the Army side because C.C. Agur, if I remember right, he's a colonel, wrote and said, we need to get Colt revolvers because the Remingtons are such bad shape that the soldiers have no faith in them.
And there's 2 separate letters I know of, one from the north and one from Arizona, that are both saying that, which is why it leads me to believe that the 1860 isn't as highly represented here.
Right.
Mostly because they're all in military storage. They haven't been shipped out, or they're issued to the guys in the east.
And then for the cavalry, one of the things is that the cavalry are not all armed with the same carbine.
Okay.
There's a mixture. A lot of them are Sharps carbines.
Mm-hmm.
But you would see Burnside carbines. You would see Smith carbines. You'd see all these because there's as many variety of carbines during the Civil War produced as there are any other type of gun.
You think that in the Red Clouds War this carried over, or by then were they?
It was certainly carrying over because we're right on the heels, and the Army is trying to get back to a consistent one type of gun.
Yeah,
but it's going to take a while.
Yeah, and that's a funny thing because the original 1866, when they start the design, and like I said, he brings his prototype in April of 1866. He wants it in 45 caliber with 70 grains of powder behind it. He said that is the cartridge we need to use. But of all people, Grant himself writes a letter to the Ordnance Department that says, since we have selected 50 caliber for the Spencer carbine, we should use 50 caliber for, and he said it was shorter too, and they like that, but he said it's consistent to select everything from now on in 50 caliber. So we got Sharps carbines being converted to 50 caliber, Spencer's being made in 50 caliber. We're going with 50 caliber for the rifle. So they definitely were trying to bring that all into one thing.
Right. But yeah, and the company of cavalry that arrived, it was not a full company. It was a small company. It's a mixture. Some of them have Springfield muskets, and Enfield muskets are mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And along with them, they just say breech loading carbines. They don't specify as to which. But Sharps were definitely very common, but there were other ones around. And if you look at like the 11th Ohio, that was stationed at Fort Laramie, they've got a wide range. You know, you've got guys with Spencer rifles, you've got guys with Sharps, you've got guys with Smiths. It's just a wide variety. There's no real consistency. The only thing that's really consistent is the infantry with the Springfield muskets.
Yeah.
And then the officers, of course, buy their own guns. Several of the officers at Fort Phil Kearny have Henry rifles because they could buy their own guns, use their own guns. So it's a variety. There is a variety there. But as you start going in, like I say, into 1867, there's not going to be any real big battles early on. As you go through the summer, being that you don't have as many civilian trains on the trail, there's not going to be quite as much as what was going on the previous year, but still quite a bit going on. And as you get into July, middle of summer, you know, Red Cloud and his other chiefs start to realize that the attack, the Battle of 80 in the hand, as they call, or 100 in the hand, as they called it, wasn't enough. They need to do more. And so Red Cloud decides, well, we need to hit all these forts, but first we should go and hit Fort Phil Kearny. That is the center of their operations. And several other chiefs in the Cheyenne say, no, we should hit Fort C.F. Smith first and then go down, hit Fort Phil Kearny, and then Fort Reno. And so there's kind of a discussion that goes on, well, which one are we going to pick? And nobody can really come to a consensus. And then they suddenly realize, well, why don't we just hit Fort C.F. Smith and Fort Phil Kearny at the same time?
Let me back you up just a little bit before we do this, because a very important part of this story is sitting here in front of me. that we don't talk about very much. Remember, as I discussed, the 66 model, the 5070, they start cranking out 200 a day January 2nd. They're so fast that on March 2nd, 1867, they receive in Omaha, Nebraska, 3,000 guns.
Right.
Now, I don't think Omaha's a fort yet at this point. As far as I know, it's a kind of a distribution hub.
Yeah. Omaha, 'cause that's a big distribution for the rail hub.
Yeah. And then on March 10th, 700 more go to Fort Leavenworth. But after that, they start in the east, arming the troops and then bringing the arms slowly. But they get that initial 3,700 guns out here. All right, disperse them. And so that's when they start. And it takes some time over wagon trails and whatnot to get them there. But it's amazing that literally only 3 months after, just 3 months after Fetterman, there's 3,000 1866 50-70 military rifles in the West being dispersed. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. But it's going to take a little while longer yet to get them out to
It is
where the conflict is taking place at. So as you get into July, towards the end of July, those Springfields, those new breech loaders, are going to arrive on the Bozeman Trail.
C.F. Smith gets them earlier than Fort Phil Kearny would up there. C.F. Smith, they come in with a relief column.
Yes, they do. And the Wells Fargo, because Wells Fargo stage, they were also a freighting office. The Wells Fargo was the ones that brought them into Fort C.F. Smith. And so they arrive with another company of 18th Infantry. That company of 18th Infantry are already armed with them. Excuse me, not 18th, 27th, because the 18th that was at Phil Kearny was redesignated 27th because when the Army decided to reorganize towards the end of 1866, the 1st Battalion, because the 18th was one of the few that had 3 corps. So 1st Corps retains its 18th Infantry. 2nd Corps becomes the 37th. And then the 3rd Corps becomes another infantry unit. And so those soldiers arrive there. They have the arms, and the new ones are distributed out to the men. And they come with plenty of rounds of ammunition. And so there's little time for target practice.
July 23rd.
Yeah, it was on July 23rd. So just a little over a week before they're going to get put into actual trials in the field. And so, at Fort C.F. Smith, they arrive there. They'll arrive at Fort Phil Kearny shortly thereafter. And they're going to be issued out to the soldiers immediately. Like I said, there's not a lot of time for practice and drill with them. So at Fort C.F. Smith, it was located right where the Bozeman Trail crossed the Bighorn River, which is a few miles below the Bighorn Canyon. And where it was located at, it was above a meadow a couple miles away, and the meadow was used for haying operations. And so the government contracted civilians to go out and work the hay fields. And they'd always put a soldier out on a knob to watch for Indian attack. And on the morning of August 1st, the men had their breakfast. They go out to go to work. And shortly thereafter, they hear gunshots from further down in the hay fields. The soldier up on the knob fires his musket and then comes running back towards the defensive structure they'd built. And then the hay cutters come running back. And 800 warriors show up on the scene. And you've got 20 some odd people, soldiers and civilians, that are about to be set upon by an estimated 800 warriors. And so once they all get back into the corral, they take defensive positions. The officer there, Lieutenant Sigismund, I want to say Sternberg. Give me just a quick minute. Sigismund Sternberg, Company G, 27th Infantry, not 37th, 27th. 27th Infantry. He's in command, and as the fight commences around the corral, he starts yelling, "Stand up and fight." He has no Indian fighting experience. And Al Colvin, who had been a commander during the Civil War and now a civilian, he had mustered out, tells him, get down, you're going to get killed. And sure enough, Sternberg is shot dead. Another soldier is shot and mortally wounded because he followed the lieutenant's orders to stand up. After they fall dead, Al Colvin basically takes over the operation. He tells don't anybody stand up. There's also a sergeant there that gets wounded. They put the sergeant in one of the wagons because they'd taken three of the wagon boxes and had basically converted them into tents. They put the sergeant in one of the tents because he's severely wounded. And they take up positions inside the corral, and Colvin tells them, do not stand up. Lay down and fire from the prone. And then he also tells them, don't fire until they're up close. Make sure of your shots. Now these troopers, these 20 some odd men with their rifles have several thousand rounds of ammunition. So ammo is not in real shortage here. They begin distributing out the ammunition. A lot of times the soldiers are putting them in their hats on the ground. One of the questions rises up is like why the 45-70s for Custer's men jammed up, but these newer 50-70s that had a weaker action when it comes to regards to ejection, they didn't really eject, they extracted.
Just a little point on that. Those guns didn't jam in 1867, but by 1869, they had a 30% failure rate on those same guns that would have been used at Wagon Box of broken springs and jammed up guns. So go on and explain. But those guns did jam just later on. So go ahead.
And so the biggest contributor to that is corrosion.
Mm-hmm.
The rounds that are coming out of these ammunition crates have not been in these ammunition crates for very long.
3 months or 4 months.
And they're not pure copper, but they're a copper alloy. And copper is prone to corrosion. So brand new rounds have not been stored in a leather belt. A lot of the soldiers are still carrying the old-fashioned ammo pouch, which they're not going to be exposed to the leather in there. They're going to be separated from it. And so
they're actually issued an insert for the tin that keeps them in wood and not touching leather.
And so the guns, there's not mention of them jamming because you've got brand new shiny bores, brand new shiny cases. Everything functions smoothly, as best as it can anyway. The civilians, which, we already talked about what they were armed with. You had 3 Spencers. You had a guy with an Enfield. The guy with the Enfield was actually was Al Colvin's brother, Zeke. He was noted to be a heck of a marksman with that muzzleloader. They laid down one heck of a line of fire. And as, troopers start to show how good they are when it comes regards to shooting, the ones that are the more accurate, well, as troopers get wounded, they're going to get the guns, and so that they can continuously put down a rain of fire. These 20 some odd people are going to hold out for 6 hours. Now, the thing of it is that the commander at Fort C.S. Smith, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, knows about the attack within a couple hours of it beginning. But he's afraid of an attack on the main post, and so he does not send out a relief column. He waits until almost dark before sending out the relief column. So for 6 hours, these men are holding off, waiting for relief, fighting the best they can. And they do hold out. They repel every attack that comes. And the largest contributing factor to that is that these new rifles that they've been issued, these breech loaders, have the ability to fire at a pretty similar rate to what the bow and arrow of the natives can fire. Because even though the gun's more powerful than the bow, with a muzzle loader, it reloads 3 rounds a minute, 4 if you're efficient. A native with a bow and arrow can launch 8 arrows in the air before the first one touches the ground.
They can't get through a dirted up piece of wood though very well.
Yeah, they don't have the penetration, but when they get in close, they're deadly effective.
Okay, so here's my question. The way I understand it, they dismount and do this attack on foot a lot. What was the reasoning?
Each group had its own tactics. Several of the attacks on there were on horseback. There was a foot charge towards the end of the battle there at the hayfield where they crossed the creek. Can't remember what the creek's name was, but there was a creek that ran right close by. There was a foot charge that came in across that towards the main gate of the corral at the hayfield. And that's where one of the younger civilians who had the double barrel 10 gauge from the post-Sutler Leighton nearly decapitated a warrior because he shot at him such close range. And that's kind of the last major attack is this one that comes across the creek. But throughout the day, it had mostly been charges by get the soldiers to fire. The idea was you get the soldiers to fire their muskets, and while they're reloading, you send in the main attack on foot to go in. Well, these muskets just keep on firing. They keep on firing. They keep on firing. And the warriors start to think, what the heck is going on? Are there more soldiers in there than we can see? And then the civilians with their Spencers, the Henrys, the Winchesters, are laying down good fire. And these civilians, there's several of them that used to be former soldiers. Fenn Burnett that was there had been a Confederate soldier during the war. Both the Colvin brothers had fought during the Civil War. So they were very effective. If they hadn't had the breech loaders, that battle might have went the other direction. Because the common tactic, and it was used by a lot of the Plains tribes, the Comanche learned the lesson very early on. They would charge when they would get into skirmishes with the Texas Rangers and the Army down there. They wait for the soldiers to fire their muskets and then come in and charge and take them out. Well, when the Rangers got the Patterson revolvers, that tactic went out the window. 20 years later, the Cheyenne and the Lakota are learning the same lesson up here at the wagon or at the hayfield. And so at the end of that, Al Colvin kills a chief and kills him so close to that corral that the warriors are not able to recover the body, because that's the thing about when fighting Indians. A lot of the times the casualties on the native side are overestimated by the Army officers.
Extremely.
There's not any bodies on the field. The natives will not usually let their fallen comrades lay on the field. And so there's another charge that comes in to recover that chief's body, but it's repelled. And so when the relief columns from Fort C.F. Smith finally arrive with a howitzer, the natives leave the field. And Al Colvin decides that, they're going to leave a message for the natives. They go to that chief's body, they scalp him, and they mutilate it. And then they hang it up on a post. As kind of a warning of what's going to happen. So as they start to fall back, the natives once again try to hit them. And basically it's kind of hit and run tactics at this point. They fire the howitzer again. And once they fire the howitzer with canister shot, the natives give up. And sometime after dark, they wind up back in at Fort C.F. Smith.
That's it.
But before word of what this battle had gone on, the next day on August 2nd, almost replicated exactly the same thing is going to happen at the Wagon Box fight. And so this fight was almost entirely Lakota. It's going to be Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, the Oglalas. Whereas Hayfield been mostly Cheyenne, but the Minneconjou and several other bands of Lakota were also present there. Mostly going to be Lakota with a few Cheyenne and Arapaho at Wagon Box. And so early in the morning, the woodcutters begin their work at the Wagon Box. And the Wagon Box corral, at the Wagon Box fight, the the men had taken the boxes off the running gear of the wagons because when you're hauling logs, that box does not let you haul logs effectively. So what they do is they take the boxes off. They formed a corral with that to keep the stock in at night and such, and also use as a fortification. And then they use the running gear to haul the timber on. And so they're a couple miles away from this wagon box corral up cutting timber when suddenly Crazy Horse and the warriors show up on a hill above them and start charging down. And everybody starts running back. Becomes kind of a running fight to get to that wagon box corral. And there is going to be, if I remember right, 2 civilians killed before they even get there. A couple more escape into the trees and try to make their way back to Fort Phil Kearny. But the soldiers get into the defensive line and start, laying down fire. Once the soldiers are in, the warriors think, we've got them hold up. This will be quick. It's going to be just like the Battle of the 100 in the Hand.
Nobody sent a smoke signal from C.F. Smith.
Right. So they charge in. They're false charge. They're met by musket fire. They send in the main attack. Met by musket fire. Okay, there's 3 more in there. And we thought, let's charge again. 3rd time. Nope. 4th time. Oh, boy. Something's wrong here. Either these soldiers have all been armed with repeaters or they have something new we don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And so not as many civilians with this group. I gotta go dig in my brain again.
Now you want to know the civilian count here?
Because
I
don't remember what all arms they had.
Let's see. I'm looking in them. I think you're looking at a different book than me.
Yeah, because I've got McDermott's again. And McDermott's is one of those. It's a great book. If you're not familiar, John McDermott was a hell of a historian, wrote many books. In fact, Tales of Trails podcast, mostly what we've been using for references on the episodes is McDermott's work, because he wrote the book on the Indian War of 1865, and then he's wrote those 2 volumes on Red Cloud's War. And so that's been really the big source for a lot of this. Let's see.
You're looking at 4 civilian choppers and a 4-man escort out right off the bat.
Right.
And they got 3 of the choppers before they got back. Or no, 3 of the soldiers and 1. Let's see.
Yeah, 3. That's right. 3 soldiers and 1 civilian.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, this talks about them.
Yep, because 3 choppers and 1 soldier made it back.
So it was R.J. Smith had 2 Spencer carbines and 2 Colt Army revolvers. Tom Mallory had 2 firearms, a Spencer and a Henry, and that specifies Spencer carbine. William Holmes had a Spencer. Frank Peach and Frank Gordon had Henry repeaters. So you've got a pretty good even distribution of Spencers to Henrys on the civilians.
And 3 civilians hide in the woods till it's over.
Yep. And then all of the infantry have the muzzle loading Spencers or breech loading Springfields. Like I said, my brain's getting fried.
That's a good question, Eric. When we get a little closer to done, I'll give you a little more in-depth answer because I have that. But George wanted to know if it was Colonel Murray at Hayfield.
Let's see.
Knockbid, sorry.
We'll find out here right quick. 369. Yeah, as Colonel Smith took over Fort Phil Kearny, I knew that, took over the district. Or excuse me, took command of the district. John Eugene Smith was new commander. Let's see here. No, it was Lieutenant Colonel Luther Bradley. That's why, because I remember now when I was doing, because I've already typed up the episode on the Hayfield fight. It was actually the first one I typed up. There was Colonel Bradley and Private Bradley. And Private Bradley was a little coward, I'll put it that way, at the Hayfield fight. Kept hiding, and when finally they wanted to volunteer to take word back to Fort C.F. Smith, he volunteered and got the heck out of there. And the rest of the men were glad to be rid of him because he just hid the whole time. So, yeah, it was Colonel Bradley that was in charge at this time. So, back to the wagon box. So, the men in the wagon box, they start putting up a good fight. And once again, the natives are scratching their heads like, what's going on in there? You know, these guys are firing on us every time we charge in. Do they have breech load, or do they have the repeaters, or do they have a new gun we don't know about? And this fight is going to last for 8 hours this time. And so where the wagon box is located at is right on the edge of a little ridge. And so at one point, the natives send in snipers to try to snipe off the soldiers from inside the wagon box corral. They are repelled. But the fight continues on. And the civilians, you know, they keep laying down heavy fire with the repeaters. The one difference between Hayfield and wagon box is that the soldiers at wagon box, even though they're 27th Infantry, they had been 18th Infantry prior to January 1st. And they had been there, some of them, to see what had happened at the Fetterman fight. And so they were feared that they would face the same fate because, you know, the consensus was that soldiers were mutilated before they died. And so they didn't want to face that same kind of torture. And so a lot of the soldiers took strings from their shoes and tied loops around the triggers of their guns because the idea was if they got overrun, they would kill themselves and not be tortured. And once again, most soldiers took their hats off, laid them down, put the bullets in there so that they could lay them to prone and fire. They would knock cracks and holes into the wagon box walls so that they could fire through them and not expose themselves. And the fight's going to continue on, like I said, for about 8 hours. And then once again, towards the end of the fight, the natives are starting to lose their taste for it. And the relief columns are sent out once again with howitzers. And so almost the wagon box and Hayfield fights are almost identical in aspects of how the battle progressed and how it took place. At the end of it, trying to determine the victors really wasn't a big victor. You can say the soldiers were victorious because they weren't wiped out. They held their position. And the natives did not wipe them out as they had planned. But the one thing that everybody can agree mostly on is that the breech loading Springfields were the main contributing factor that saved the lives of the men that are inside these. And also, you've got a little bit more of a defensive position than what Fetterman had up on a ridge line. But yeah, that was, the big outcome was that there's really no victor. What it did show is that Red Cloud wasn't done fighting. He was going to continue on the fight, but they start to realize that they're not going to be able to fight as effectively with these new guns as what they had done before.
No longer can we outnumber them 10-1 and just run them over in a fortified position. I believe I read the other day that Crazy Horse being at the wagon box, that's the last time Crazy Horse would ever attack a fortified military position. And he'd done it a couple times before, but that was the end of that for him.
And the attacking of fortifications is not something that the natives had done a lot of. The idea was to draw the soldiers out, but they felt that, when they overwhelmed them there 800 to 23, we can attack this position. We can wipe them out. And if they had Springfield muskets, very well could have been that they would have been wiped out quickly. But as it was, those 20 some odd people were able to hold out both locations.
Now, so for the Hayfield fight, I'm going to take the most modest estimation and say roughly 29 versus 800. Would you say that's the modest and probably correct number?
Yeah.
What do you think? Because, everybody says 3,000, and I'm always like, whoa. Who did that counting? How many do you think are in the wagon box?
It's about 600 to 800.
Yeah.
When
you're 20 or
and wagon box.
When you're 20 guys, that might as well be 8,000.
Because there was another group that was supposed to attack Fort Reno about the same time, and that one never transpired.
Smoke signal got there.
Yeah. But no, early historians, early on, because the Army, once again, likes to inflate numbers. The highest number I've seen at wagon box is 1,200. No, I take that back. It was 2,000 at wagon box. There was another that said 1,200. And 2,000, that's approaching the maximum number of warriors that Red Cloud had altogether. So it's one of those things that, the numbers get overinflated, and then bigger numbers were used, taught for a lot of years, in the early 1930s and such. But there's also, I'd read somewhere where the idea was that Red Cloud's whole force attacked at Fort C.F. Smith and then at Fort Phil Kearny. Thing of it is that I don't think Red Cloud could have traveled with all of his warriors after midnight from Fort C.F. Smith to get to Fort Phil Kearny by 10 o'clock in the morning the next day. It was even a little earlier than that. And so it was the force was pretty well split up.
Yeah. There's a question here iPod Walker had that I want to get right because there's several different answers to this, and maybe you remember. I know it's in the book.
The amount of ammunition.
Yeah, some have set up words of 7,000 rounds. I don't know if that's.
I think that's what McDermott has here with 7,000 rounds.
Fired in how many hours? Let's see. That was a longer fight. That was 2 fights technically.
Yeah. Civilians, it's hard to tell how many civilians because they're fighting with their own ammunition. Bet a lot of those guys had at least close to 100 rounds each.
They showed up at the fort with 100,000 rounds of ammunition before it was distributed out, and they had ammunition boxes, not just what was on their person, because one guy was assigned, you run and get ammo. They had a guy, I can't remember who, was assigned to just run, and they didn't put it in their power cruise. They put their hats on the ground, filled their hats up, and just fired as fast as they could fire. By hour 2, they thought they were melting the gun barrels, is how hot things were. So
let's see here.
I believe that.
This says 7,000 rounds in their supply wagon on July 31st. So 2 days before that. So that is.
That doesn't mean they expended all of it.
As noted in an article there.
And that's not counting the Spencers and Henrys.
Right.
So I want to find this to be exact, but they took 7,000 rounds, and I'm pretty sure they were getting low on ammo
Right.
by the time it was done. So
let's see.
I wish I could find that in this book right here. Let's see. I might be in reports because I really want to get this right.
Yeah, and then it was kind of the same thing there. So as I said at Hayfield, Lieutenant Sigismund Sternberg told the men, stand up and fight, don't be cowards, and got killed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on the first charge at the wagon box, Lieutenant John Jeunesse, who was, in command of that, and I'm going to quote this exactly. During the first charge, Lieutenant John Jeunesse stood up on top of one of the wagon boxes and said, boys, line up. Corporal Robertson replied, Lieutenant, I hope you'll get a better shelter. You'd better take care of yourself. Angered, the lieutenant replied, I know how to fight Indians, and fell back with a bullet hole in the middle of his forehead.
Oh.
Off the bat, the officers were killed in both of them.
Just for your information, the first official report coming back on August the 4th, this is written by... Who wrote this? James Powell, Captain CEO of the 27th Infantry, wrote that my lowest estimate was 3,000 men. So that's where the 3,000 number I had in my head came from. Even though I know it's not nearly that many. I'm sure that if you were in that wagon circle, it probably seemed like 3,000.
Right. But the thing is that at this fight, the Indians definitely had more firearms. Most of them are still armed with bows and arrows and hand weapons. But there's definitely more firearms being noted. Because the lieutenant is shot in the head. Let's see. Private Thomas Doyle was shot through the head, but he didn't die right away. It took him a couple hours to die. And then Private Henry Haggerty was shot through the shoulder and then later shot through the head.
We're looking at the same report. Horace Kittredge killed while escaping the other corral.
Yep. Yeah, and then the Indians began calling the soldiers' guns medicine guns because of the fact they were able to shoot so rapidly. Red Cloud called them much talk guns. Let's see. Fire Thunder describes it. I'll read his quote here. They were lying behind the boxes and they shot faster than ever shot before. We thought it was some new medicine or great power that they had, for they shot so fast it was like tearing a blanket. We came on after sunrise and we meant to ride right over them and rub them out. But our ponies were afraid of the ring of fire of the guns. Our women were watching us from the hills and we could hear them singing and mourning for us whenever the shooting stopped. We tried hard, but we could not do it. There were dead warriors and horses piled all around the boxes and scattered all over the plain. Then we left our horses in a gulch and charged on foot, but it was like green grass withering in a fire. So we picked up our wounded and went away. It was bad.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to the estimates of casualties, like I said, it's almost impossible to account. Native accounts put the estimate, below 100. The Army accounts say, several hundred were killed. But the reality of it is the Native accounts are probably closer to the actual number. Let's see.
Yeah, Joshua, there's an interesting thing about that. The guns and the ammo of the 5070 is supposedly it's a pretty good round. They don't have a hollow base, but the government suggested at the time that you should clean your gun every 40 shots.
Right.
They didn't have time to do that, and they found that the accuracy didn't really fail them. And as a matter of fact, government tests after this fight, they were able to get up to 250 rounds before they noticed accuracy really, really falling apart. But that was because they were lubed extremely well, I think. But
I'll be right back.
Technically only supposed to fire 40 rounds before cleaning in a controlled, I would say, I call it a controlled battle. Like if you were in lines, they would try to get men back to clean guns after 40 rounds. But yeah, that would be 38 rounds an hour. That's actually, that's pretty hot. Even at 20 rounds an hour, wouldn't there be a lot of fouling? I think there was, but it just kept on going. Well, we don't know how much they had stashed, including the civilians, but like we said, iPod Walker, it looked like around 7,000. The casualties by the Indians they claim, the Indians claim 2. I see that in one place, but that was obviously not true. And soldiers claimed hundreds, but the true estimate seems to be the middle ground of about 60 were lost. They seem to have killed about 60 natives, and they don't know how many were wounded. So that's Saboteur. He says, Eyewitnesses of the Fetterman Fight, Indian Views by John H. Monnet is a good book if you... Let me bring Duke back in. Is a good book if you... I brought you back.
Yeah.
Want to read the native side? Joshua Harris said, that's very impressive. Great info. Thanks. And I can't believe just how hot those guns had to be. And they reported that those guns were very hot because 50-70 keeps up that 66 barrel in 10 rounds, like where you can't hardly touch it.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was hot. And they weren't going to spare their drinking water for the cooling the guns because they didn't have very much of that.
Yeah. Yeah, they did not have much water. Yeah, and that Saboteur, that book there is the one that I don't have handy, but I do have this one, Indian Interviews by Eli Richter. I was going to see what they said on that. 329 to 330. Okay, let's see.
Joshua Harris said, that's very impressive. Great info. Thanks again.
Yeah.
The Saboteur said that's a good book you have there.
Yeah, and he was the one that recommended this one to me.
All right, if you're going to be just a second, I can answer this one question.
Yeah, didn't really give a lot of detail there.
We're ready. Are you still out there, Eric M509? Hopefully. Does Kansas permit camping between high and low water camping? Or are stocked fenced waterways a thing? Now, everywhere where I'm at, I'm not on a big river, but every little river and stream I'm on is fenced off. I have 9 water gaps myself.
Here on this is with an interview with Red Cloud is that Red Cloud could not remember the wagon box fight at all.
Just let that little part go away from his memory.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're still here, I had a question here that didn't have to do with Red Cloud's War, but I'm going to go ahead and answer it. But Eric asked, surprised they never tried to use an 1876 Winchester, big bore, multiple shots. Okay, there's several factors here. The 1876 was never chambered originally in 4570. It was chambered in 4560. Was it 5090 something? I mean, it was in several, but none of them were in And they were long and short. And one of the reasons they didn't do it was because of the rounded nose of the 4570. They were afraid would cause detonations in the tube magazine, whereas all their proprietary rounds are flat nosed.
Right.
Military attempted to put a rounded nose because they believed round nose was superior. They attempted to put a round nose in a center fire converted Spencer magazine in 1866 to see if this was viable. They dropped it 12 foot onto a timber floor. They dropped it 13 times and it detonated. Whereas they, of course, dropped their flat nose cartridge that they were trying to at the same time, never did detonate, and was something like 150 drops. Yeah. And so they decided right then and there, if we're going with a round nose bullet, we're never going with an internal tube fed magazine ever. And so they never did. Every magazine they would ever really have would be up and down. But that was one reason. The next reason was the United States never financially recovered from the Civil War until about 1882 to 83. Yeah. And the whole reason, Duke will tell you, that Custer was in the Black Hills was not for land. It was for gold because they were out of money. The last reason is that they were so far out of money by 1877, Springfield received this much money for building new guns. And the only way they got through that year was because they had, in 1870, sold some guns underhandedly to Remington to sell to the French during the Franco-Prussian War and made themselves a cool $2 million to help them float through those bad times. But 1877, which was the year the 1876 would have been the big new upcoming thing, in 1875, they made 17,393 rifles at Springfield, full-length rifles. 1876, they made 11,369. In 1877, they made 16. That's where they were at. Nothing was getting done but repair and maybe a little bit of sight adjustment. And they knew that by the time they got out of this slump about 1879, when they really started cranking back up to about 18,000 guns, they saw the rest of the world. They knew bolt actions were a thing. And they were like, let's just ride this for another 5, maybe 10 years, and we will have the better gun. And they did. And it worked out really, really good for them. So that's the reason they never adopted a lever action. I'll say this. A lever action is a superior civilian firearm. And in certain hands, it could have been the superior military firearm, but it never would have been for the amount of money it would have cost them. They could have never armed the military completely with it in the time that it was prevalent. So that's right. The answer to that.
Yeah, it was 4575, 5095, and 4560.
Yeah.
And the 4560 was just a cut down 4570.
All were proprietary flat nose cartridges.
Yep. And the 4560 was the only straight wall case. The other two were bottlenecks.
Okay, so reading on back down through here. iPod Walker, what was the casualties of the Indians? Joshua Harris said there would have been 304 rounds fired by 23 men if they were all soldiers, 38 rounds per hour. I mean, wow, that's hot. Even at 20 rounds per hour. Yeah, okay, I answered that about the fouling. Let's see. That was what we read that. In Missouri, it's permitted. iPod Walker said, I read a report that after the Indian Wars, the Indians would overplay the Army's effectiveness and underplay their roles for fear of retaliation. They often stashed or got rid of trophies.
Yep. And if you read, especially with the Custer fight, when you read the accounts, and a few of them are in here, they always say that the Lakota did not scalp or take things off the soldiers. It was always the Cheyenne.
Mm-hmm.
Which there was a little bit of truth to that, because Sitting Bull had said that, you know, he'd saw in his vision the soldiers were not mutilated or their goods were taken. And so, but there were some that did partake in that.
Yep. Gray Pilgrim said, hi, guys. Yep, he said the Federals were broke. Yes,
and that's the thing, is that the Red Cloud's War and the 1876 campaign all start over gold.
Gotta have the gold to.
because they want the Bozeman Trail to get to the Montana goldfields. They want the Black Hills to get to the gold that's there, because the country is in economic turmoil, especially right after the Civil War. They really need that gold. And then, in the 1870s, you have an economic crisis, and they've got to have that gold.
Yeah. Let's see. Byland and C point. I'll get. Salvador wanted to know, Duke, see if George Sword is in that book.
Yeah, I just found it here, and he talks about several of the fights. So he says that the Fetterman fight, there were 7 Oglaws killed and 2 Cheyennes, making 9 total. There's other estimates that say a little bit higher. We really don't have a set number on how many natives were killed at the Fetterman. One native said there was a lot of the warriors that were killed by arrows from other warriors because they were firing back and forth so much. And then, on the wagon boxes, Sword says that the boxes weren't on the ground, but they was on the running gear. There was one wagon box on running gear. That was the one they used for the gate on that corral. Said they shot from under the wagons. Says that they charged 3 or 4 times, but did not exceed 4. And then about 300 had charged right up on the wagons. And he says, he didn't know any soldiers came out to reinforce the besieged. They didn't come out until almost nightfall once again, because it was 8 hours of fighting. And then he talks about, kind of the way they fought. There was no one person really in command. And that's the thing in a lot of native warfare, is that every Indian does his job. It's guerrilla warfare. There's not really a centralized command saying, go do this, go do that. You know what you need to do, and you go do your part.
Saboteur said page 329.
And that's the one I'm reading right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see. Then he talks about he didn't remember if American Horse was in the wagon box fight. Said Red Cloud was at the Fetterman.
We'll get to that question in just a second, iPod Walker. That's something we've discussed before. By land and sea, he didn't correct me, but he said the U.S. Army never adopted a tube magazine is correct, but the Navy did adopt two different tube magazine rifles during the late 19th century. Yeah, that Navy adopts everything. Go ahead, sorry.
And then the last of his here says the wagon box fight was fought by the Oglalas and a few Minneconjous mingled in. And I've seen another count that said something about there was a few Cheyenne there as well. But that's the thing is that the hayfield was mostly Cheyenne, and the wagon box was mostly Lakota.
Tim O'Neill wanted to know if the 76 was the first neck cartridges in production.
No, Spencer technically is a neck cartridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely the 65.
The 4440 is technically a neck. And Spencer had some really bad bottlenecks that they experimented with. There was like the 46-56, 40-something 56, and then they had a 30 caliber 56. 56 30 38. And then 56-46, and that 56-38 is, oh my gosh, that is a hell of a bottleneck. It's got a really steep shoulder on it. But they didn't put those into big production. And then there was another one of the 50s, because it was 56, 56, 56, 52, and 56, 50.
Greg Pilgrim said, "Hey Garrett, when are we going to see the next trapdoor video?" Well, that's the whole reason I wanted to do this with Duke, was for a refresher, because part of it's filmed every single night. I'm spending 3 or 4 hours studying and writing notes. Right now, the script, even the stuff that's not filmed, the script's at 2 hours long. I don't know if anybody's interested in watching one that long, but I might break it into 2. I don't know. But as soon as I'm going to be filming it this weekend, and as soon as Duke gets down here to shoot the opening and some shooting scenes, hopefully it'll be getting released in about 15 days, maybe 2 weeks and a little more, a little change, hopefully.
And yeah, I'm hoping I'll be out there
About 10 days, about 7 days.
let's see here. Yeah, it might be about 7 days that I'm out there.
I'm not rushing.
21st to the 22nd.
I'm not rushing this one real hard. I'm taking my time. I'm not going to edit it over a 3-day period either. So I'm going to try to do my best to make it 100%.
And then I'm probably going to leave the event on Sunday night.
Oh, you're not staying Monday?
Yeah, I'm going to try to get back home.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I got to do a few things around here.
Okay. Yep, but Bozeman Trail Friendly Fire iPod Walker asked the question that has been asked so many times in history. Were the wagons full of dirt? I would think they were not bulletproof.
There's some conjecture on that.
I think the eyewitness accounts prove that the hayfield definitely had
They had a dirt berm up on the bottom of that corral.
Every eyewitness account I have read about the wagon box fight claims there was nothing between those and them and those bullets but a 1/2-inch pine board.
Yep.
And that's everything I've read officially.
And there's a couple that sat in the boxes, and I was reading one account in the McDermott's while I was looking there that they were sticking cartridge cases between boards to prop them up so they get the guns through to see.
Yeah.
There were some that were completely behind the box, but yeah, they didn't have cover. They had concealment.
Yeah, and let me, I have the quote here. Actually, I was just reading it the other day. If I can find it. I never can find it when I'm looking for it. Because it is addressed in this book. I might have to find. Well, I'll bring it out in the video whenever I make it if I can't find it right now. But yeah, they definitely. One guy was quoted saying, "Nothing between us and death but a 1/2-inch board." So as Duke would say, not cover but concealment. Right?
Yep. And considering the natives don't have a lot of guns, yeah, you can shoot into the boards, and a lot of them would, but your chances of actually hitting, they're not going to be hitting that many.
Yeah, Landon C. said that the Navy adopted the two, talking about the two feds that the Navy adopted were the Winchester Hotchkiss and the Remington Keene.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know anything about what's east of Topeka, Tim. I spent very little time over there in my life. Tuttle Creek Dam, you might be able to camp around there. They have music festivals and stuff, so there might be campgrounds up in that area. Pity no one adopted the rolling block. Yeah, nobody in the world. We had that discussion. It cost $21 to buy the Remington from Remington in 1869. It cost $8.16 to make an 1866 rifle. After using $416,000, they had 51,000 rifles, almost armed the 56,000 troops they had. If the United States had adopted the Remington rolling block in the 1867 era, they would have left 37,000 troops armed with Springfield muzzleloaders until at least 1870. So that's why no rolling block. Okay, Joshua Harris asked if you guys were there, which gun would you prefer to have? The Springfield. Well, this is going to fall down along the lines of the guns that each of us actually have. The Springfield, the Henry, or the Spencer.
I'm going to come down to either the Henry or the Spencer, and that's because, they're repeaters. The downside of the Spencer is it's only got 7 rounds, and you have to manually cock it every time. Downside of the Henry is that you got twice as much ammo to try to reload in one setting. And then you've also got a tube magazine that is exposed, and so it's a little more prone to getting stuff in there to cause it to jam. And then on top of that, you've got a little bit weaker cartridge than the 5650. The 5650, even though it's a little stubby cartridge, is it's got quite a bit more knockdown power to it. So I'd be kind of tied between the Henry and the Spencer, and obviously there was one of those guys there too because he took both. But if I really had the option, if it was available, it would be a 66 Winchester.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you start running low on ammo, you just reach up there on the side and just put them in. You don't have to pull a magazine tube out, stuff them in the butt, or you don't have to turn the gun up, open the tube, and stuff them down the front. It's just right there.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing I've often wondered about this fight, and I haven't seen it written anywhere. I wonder if those Henrys and Spencers had more than 50 rounds apiece for each of them. Because the government wasn't packing ammo for them.
Nope.
So,
got to buy their own ammo.
If I have the option, okay, first of all, I'm not putting down either the Spencer or the Henry. I'm glad they're there. If I'm a soldier, I really don't care because they're there. But the main supply of ammo is going to be for my rifle, which is the 66. And I've never shot a Spencer. We own one, an original. Never have shot it because I don't have rimfire ammo, and I haven't converted it. But I have shot that 66 quite often, and it's one of my favorite guns for accuracy and just you can't quite keep up with a Henry, but you're closer to keep it. When you're picking rounds up off the ground from the prone position, you're close to holding or being at the same speed as that Spencer.
Yeah.
Considering you don't have to do a lot of up and down work or anything. So
on these saddlebags that I got here, which are pommel bags fit in the front, but they're about the same size as what the rear bags would be. And in this set, I could probably easily get 3 boxes of Henry ammo. And I've got 2 reproduction boxes. I got a couple more on the way because I wasn't paying attention when I ordered this box. And this one's made for a market that was only in California.
Yeah.
And the downside of this one is it's taped up. I can't put rounds in unless I cut it open.
So
the
real question is, do you think you haul 300 rounds with you? But well, obviously they were worried about attack. Well,
yeah. The thing is, I got to carry my other stuff in the saddlebags too. So,
I would bet 100 rounds would be a safe bet.
Yeah, this is, the typical box you probably would have seen up there at the time. This is a very early Henry's repeating box, and this holds 50 cartridges. And
my mindset back then or today would be, in what situation would we ever get in where we're going to fire over 100 rounds and then you get into one?
Right. Yeah, this holds 50 rounds. Hopefully I'll have some reproduction inert Henry rounds here at some point.
Yeah, I had some ideas for that, but I haven't talked to you about them yet.
Yeah.
Hopefully get it done in time.
I don't know if we'll get them copper plated before then or done, but I'll have them available at some point. But yeah, so a box of 50, I could get 3 of them in one bag. If I filled both bags with them, I could get 6. So that's 300 rounds right there. But 2 boxes, that's probably going to be pretty typical because the other thing you got to remember, these ammo is going to be expensive out in the West. If I remember right, when Frank Gerard talked about carrying a Henry, and I think he was actually referring about a Winchester, he paid $80 for the rifle in 1868. And so box ammunition, I don't remember what the price tag was on these, but they're not going to be cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And considering that anything going up the Bozeman Trails, going towards gold camps, it's already going to be marked up in price. It's going to be pretty expensive out there.
iPod Walker asks, was the 5110 ever considered by the Army? Not to my knowledge. 5110 is a very specialized cartridge for a very specialized reason, and that's killing big, thick-hided animals.
The Army was playing around with it with Gatling guns.
Oh, like that could be. Yeah. Okay, that could be. Because they had 1-inch cartridges and everything for Gatling guns.
There's a big argument on the 5140 Sharps. It's actually not a Sharps round. The 5140 come out after Sharps was done. It was a Winchester round, and it was basically used in Africa for big game hunting.
I should say Army, not military, because otherwise Byland and C will come in and correct me. Well, the Navy adopted 3 51.
But yeah, the Army did look at adopting that for use in Gatling guns, and they just decided to not go with it. And I've talked with a guy that he's very big on sharps history, and he shoots a sharps in competition, and he straight out tell you the 5140, you're wasting powder, because by the time you get a barrel long enough to use up all that powder, you're not going to be carrying that thing around. But yeah, the 4570, it was plenty adequate for what it was being used for. And then Tim O'Neill said on there, Spencer's $13 ammo by the hundreds. Most of your Spencer box ammo is going to come 25 rounds to a box. And so this is a box 5650. I was going to bring that out to Kansas, but it's dated 1874. So it's going to be too late for ours. But 5650, yeah, it was. I should say Spencer ammo in general was usually in 25 round boxes. And when it was issued out, you would find these boxes inside of the crates when the Army was issuing them out.
Yep. Saboteur said, and I'll go back up here for a couple more, but I want to touch on this that he just said. Yellowstone Kelly said he paid $50 for Henry Carbine supply of ammo. That makes a lot of sense because the government was willing at one point in the Civil War to pay $40. Now just think about that, $40 a piece for a gun. And people always ask me, why didn't they adopt the Henry in 66 or 65? It was like $8.16 versus $40. The rolling block cost $21. That's why the military didn't adopt them right then and there. And it's not because they didn't want to spend the money. They didn't have it. They did not have it.
No.
Let's see. There was one more thing. Gray Pilgrim said they could have used the Frank Wesson 41 or such. They did at Little Bighorn, but on the other side. iPod Walker, good question. Did the troops at Wagon Box have pistols?
The troops didn't.
Because
civilians were noted to have them.
There's a misconception, and I've heard it on that one other channel that we don't talk about, that the Wagon Box fight was fought by cavalrymen.
27th Infantry.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't think they had pistols. Let's see. Curious, does Duke make hand loads for his 1911? Enjoy this live like every time. Thank you so much for the history hand lesson. I look forward to it.
No, I don't. I don't shoot enough to hand load for it.
I tried a couple times. You know what I found out? You can't save brass out of a 1911. I can't ever.
Yeah, I go shooting and it's all over the place. I made the mistake one day of grabbing one of those rounds.
Yeah, I think you did. After I shot it, you caught it in the air on video.
Yep. Garrett was sitting over shooting. I reached out my hand and I grabbed that sucker and I'm sitting there. I caught it and then it went flying. I
think I had to edit that video a little bit. Greg Pilgrim said 4570 rules. It's still rules. Josh Gaskin. Yeah, kind of going back to that 5110 thing. The government was working on. They knew the 4570 with the correct load and the correct size could kill a man as far as a man could see. So they didn't need anything else. And they started working on it by changing the bullet up to a 500 grainer. And then they put that beautiful Buffington sight on the 1884. And they never looked back because they won just about every international shooting competition after that. Before that, the Martini Henry spanked them every year. After that, they got pretty competitive with it. So Bannerman's catalogs. That was in 1868. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think the price of the Henry, because they only made 14,000, ever really went down from about $40.
Yep.
He said he did that at Fort Berthold.
Berthold, yeah, that's in North Dakota.
Berthold, not Berthold. Yeah, Gunsmith 4570 said a great deal of difference between our government now as far as money was concerned. Yeah, you see, back then, if there wasn't any money, there wasn't any money. You can't income tax. Nobody's paying taxes hardly anywhere in the country. And so it's like, yeah, there's not a lot of money there. They're not going to get it. And what a lot of people don't realize is any money they do have that's surplus goes to the Transcontinental Railroad in those years, because that's an expensive endeavor in and of its own. Let's see. Joshua Harris said that price difference would be $138 versus $750 per gun, 1866. Yeah, that's a big difference in why $8.16 or I think you might have been talking about the Henry. Anyway, all right, we're caught up on comments. Got anything else to talk about?
Yeah, give me just a second here.
And just so you know, on the M4 carbines, the government paid $600 a piece, so they still weren't paying that much per gun, even to this day, adjusted for inflation.
All right. Yeah, I think we pretty much summed it up there.
That was a lot of fun. I'm ready to finish my video. I was sitting here taking notes some of the time. Yeah, Kodak Tackman said just fire off random things at this point. We probably better go at some point.
Yeah, because we're getting at 2.5 hours here. But yeah, no. Well, I know we talk a lot about Red Cloud's War. We're probably going to still talk a lot about Red Cloud's War.
Oh, it's one of them great time periods that not everybody else covers. Well,
right.
Some people do,
But yeah, so currently I'm working on the script for the next episode, Tales of Trails podcast. It's going to be a new song release from Garrett. With that, don't forget, we might want to try to record that before I release it.
yeah, I got to do it all over again. I messed up 2 words, and I got to do it all over again.
But yeah. Well, that'll be coming out here probably in the next few days. I'm finishing up the script right now. I'm about halfway through. That episode will finish up with the Fetterman fight, and then the next episode we'll get into the repercussions of the Fetterman fight, and then I'm going to try to squeeze Wagon Box into the end of that one. And then the next episode after that will be the Hayfield, and then we'll finish up with the Peace Treaty of 1868. Yeah, because the Hayfield, I managed to get a full episode written up on the Hayfield. I think it was like a 15-minute episode, close to it. I'm going to try to keep those episodes between 15 and 20 minutes, but I got a feeling the Fetterman fight here one is going to become a little bit longer like the 1865 one was. So, yeah, just be sure to stay tuned to that Tales of the Trails podcast. That YouTube channel is different from the Duke Fraser Productions one. And if you haven't subscribed to it, go over there and check it out. If I do it right, I can share that here.
And when you guys get off here, Wild West Extravaganza just released Tom Horn and the Apache, if you're still hungry for some history.
Yeah. So we're going to, I'll copy that, and I'm going to put it down here on the bottom, and I'm going to post it on both of the chat feeds so that everybody gets a chance to see it. So yeah, that link will take you to the Tales of the Trails podcast. And right now we've got 4 episodes up. The last one was the Peace Treaty of 1866. Like I said, the next one will be the Fetterman fight.
You can't do the Wagon Box in the Hayfield till you get down here. Then you'll know what it's like to shoot that 66, and you'll probably be like, "Man, this is a terrible weapon. Arm everybody with Spencer rifles." just a final update, since this was about the guns. What was that? It? Yeah, that was it. Sorry, I went to the wrong place here. The 1866s, like we discussed, were excellent in 1866. The failure rate was insane on those particular models by 1869 because the ejection system is a giant horseshoe spring that comes out of the bottom of the barrel and has to be inletted down into the wooden stock, almost clear through the stock. And by 1869, the reports were miserable on that. The ammo was older, the springs were brittle, and they were breaking left and right. They even wrote in the actual manual of arms that it's actually on page 7 of the manual of arms. Remember, the spring is a luxury and not a necessity. If it breaks, you can still use this arm. And you can, it just doesn't sling them out. You got to dump them out every time. Because it'll still extract them, but it won't kick them out. And that was definitely leading to, and Erskine Allen saw it once again before he was halfway through production run of the 1866s. Actually, on the early 1866s, he'd already tried to put a receiver. By the time those springs started getting bad, we start getting a receiver. We get into the model 1868 that will carry us pretty well all the way through to the 4570 and the 1873. So they did have their issues. They just did not show up in those first 6 months of battle. And what's great, the good thing is, with the Model 66, outside of the Franco-Prussian War, that was about the extent of its battles for those 2 major fights, because the infantry never really got attacked by native forces again in that way. Everything else was cavalry, and to my knowledge, now Duke may correct me, but to my knowledge, everything else between then was pretty well cavalry catching natives or natives bouncing off civilians. It's never going to be a head-on attack onto infantry fortifications again. Unless you can think of something I can't.
Yeah, I can't think. And in McDermott's, it basically says that after Wagon Box, they went back to their old hit and run tactics on wagon trains and such.
Yeah, and that would be bad enough. Joshua Harris said, just listen to Tom Horn over there before I came over here. It's really good. And Cool Hand said, I guess I'm really late to the show. I'll have to catch it on replay.
That's the nice thing about this is you can always catch it on the replay.
I know some live streamers that they use music and they show guns and they do everything, and then they just don't put it up on replay.
Yeah.
So,
of course, anytime we think about touching anything, it gets shut down.
One of these days we'll have to build up over to Rumble where we could go do the fun stuff over there. Joshua Harris said, just subscribe, Duke. Really appreciate what you guys do here.
Awesome.
Are you about outdone? I think I'm about done.
I'm about done. I gotta go. I think I'm gonna have to go find me some more Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
This 2-can limit's starting to kill me.
Are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's call it here. So yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining in. I don't know when we'll do the next live stream. Because next week I'll be in Kansas.
We might try to do something from here.
We might try to do something from there. So we'll head your way. I'm going to have to get on one of the chats with Snapper one of these days because I haven't seen Snapper in a long time.
Yeah, and we tried on Sunday and then it failed. We were going to. But, yeah, we need to start. After I can announce this, that Ethan, we've just had such a crazy first of the year. Everything's been down. Now we're getting ready for what little wheat harvest there's going to be again. Ethan has said that July 2024 is going to be the 11 Bang Bang Renaissance. I don't know how about that's true or not, but he's ready to. He's got some stuff in line. I hope to release the next episode of the Trapdoor series within the first week of June, and then after that, every month after that will be Trapdoor series because it gets way easier after this. But anyway, Salvador said, saying you have a Coke addiction doesn't sound as good as you think, dude.
Oh, I seen that. Oh, that's funny.
All right. I'm ready if you are.
Yeah, let's call her good. So once again, thanks everybody for coming in. Stay tuned to Tales of the Trails podcast. There'll be another episode coming up here pretty quick. And we'll catch you on the next one, whichever chat it's going to be. So
Bye.
Thank you all. Take care. Keep your powder dry.